It was the middle of October 2022. I had just turned 23 a few weeks earlier and was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. College hadn't worked out the way I expected, and after bouncing between a couple of part-time jobs, I accepted a full-time position at a distribution warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio. The pay wasn't amazing, but the night shift came with a small bonus that made it worth it. My schedule was 10 p.m. to 6:30 a.m., Sunday through Thursday. I figured it would only be temporary until I found something better. The warehouse itself was enormous. During orientation, they told us it covered nearly 1 million square feet. Endless rows of metal shelving stretched from one end of the building to the other, stacked with everything from electronics to household supplies, waiting to be shipped across the country. The first few weeks were exactly what you'd expect. I'd clock in, grab my scanner, put one earbud in, and spend the next 8 hours walking aisle after aisle picking orders. There were usually around 50 people working overnight, but because the building was so large, you could go 20 or 30 minutes without seeing another person. At first, I actually liked that. No customers. No manager constantly watching over my shoulder. Just me. The hum of forklifts somewhere in the distance, and the occasional voice over the radio. Around my 4th week, I started getting assigned to the far north end of the warehouse. Most employees hated that section because it was older than the rest of the building. The lights weren't as bright. Some of the shelves were nearly empty, and the concrete floor always seemed colder over there. One night, while scanning boxes around 2:30 in the morning, I heard something that made me stop walking. A loud, metallic clang echoed from somewhere a few aisles away. It sounded like someone had dropped a heavy pipe onto the floor. I waited for another sound. Nothing. I figured another employee had accidentally knocked something over, so I shrugged it off and kept working. About 10 minutes later, it happened again. This time it was closer. Clang. Then silence. I looked down the aisle expecting to see someone pushing a pallet jack. Nobody. The aisle was completely empty. I even walked to the end and looked both directions. Nothing. Just rows and rows of shelves disappearing into the distance. When I mentioned it during lunch, one of the older forklift drivers laughed. "North End again?" I nodded. He smiled without looking up from his coffee. "You'll hear weird stuff over there. Building settles, forklifts, echoes." Everyone else just nodded like it was normal. So I let it go. For another week, everything stayed quiet. Then, something changed. Every night around the same time, between 2 and 3 a.m., I'd notice movement. Not clear enough to make out a person, just quick flashes. Like someone stepping behind a shelf right before I looked. The first couple of times I convinced myself it was another picker, but whenever I'd walk over, the aisle would be empty. No carts, no workers, no voices, nothing. One Thursday morning, I checked the scanner to see who else was assigned to my section. Nobody. I was the only employee working the entire North End that night. Even knowing that, I still caught myself seeing movement out of the corner of my eye. It got to the point where I'd stop every few minutes and look over my shoulder. I wasn't scared yet, just uncomfortable. The kind of feeling you get when your brain keeps telling you someone is nearby, even though there's no evidence of it. Then came the night I couldn't explain. Around 3:15 a.m., I was pulling a box from the top shelf when I clearly heard footsteps, not echoes, actual footsteps, slow, steady, walking across the aisle behind me. I turned around immediately. No one. The footsteps stopped the exact moment I looked. I stood there for several seconds, listening. The warehouse had gone strangely quiet. Even the forklift sounded farther away than usual. I told myself to finish the order and move on. As I reached for my scanner, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. My picking cart was no longer where I'd left it. It had been pushed about 15 feet farther down the aisle, and I knew, without any doubt, I hadn't moved it. I just stood there staring at the cart. There wasn't any way it could have rolled on its own. The warehouse floors were perfectly level, and even if they weren't, the cart had locking wheels. I'd gotten into the habit of locking them every time I stopped, because my supervisor had drilled that into us during training. I walked over and checked. The wheels were still locked. For a few seconds, I honestly questioned myself. Maybe I'd pushed it without thinking. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Night shifts have a way of messing with your head, especially around 3 in the morning when your body thinks it should be asleep. I tried to shake it off and finish the order. The rest of that shift was quiet. Before leaving, I mentioned the cart to my supervisor, Rick. He was in his late 40s and had worked there for over a decade. He didn't laugh. Instead, he asked me exactly which aisle I was in. I told him. He paused for a second before saying, "Just don't wander off by yourself if you hear something." That wasn't the answer I expected. I asked him what he meant. He shrugged. People sneak into warehouses sometimes, looking for a place to sleep, looking to steal. Just call security if something feels off. That explanation made a lot more sense than anything I'd imagined. After all, the building was huge. If someone found a way inside, they could probably stay hidden for hours. The following Sunday, I came into work determined not to let my imagination get the best of me. Everything was normal until a little after 2 in the morning. I was scanning items in one of the longest aisles in the building when my radio crackled. "Unit 12, what's your location?" It was security. I picked up the radio. "North section, aisle 74. There was a brief pause. "Copy." That was it. No explanation. 5 minutes later, I saw the security guard walking toward me. His flashlight was already on, even though the warehouse lights were fully lit. He asked if I'd seen anyone. I told him no. He looked around the aisle before lowering his voice. "We got an alarm from one of the emergency exit doors." I looked toward the far end of the warehouse. "Did someone get in?" "We don't know." He thanked me and continued searching. For the next hour, I couldn't focus. Every distant sound made me stop working. Every shadow between the shelves looked like someone standing there. Around 4 in the morning, I finally started relaxing. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. This time they didn't stop. They were moving parallel to me on the opposite side of the shelving. I couldn't see who it was because the shelves blocked my view, but whoever it was matched my pace perfectly. When I walked, they walked. When I slowed down, they slowed down. I stopped completely. The footsteps stopped too. My heart started pounding. Trying to convince myself it was another employee, I called out, "Hey!" No answer. I waited. Nothing. I grabbed my radio. "Security, I think someone's in aisle 76. Before anyone answered, the footsteps suddenly took off running. Not jogging, running, fast. The sound echoed through the warehouse as whoever it was sprinted toward the back loading docks. At almost the same moment, another voice came over the radio. "All units, we got movement in the north loading area." Then someone shouted in the distance, "Stop!" I stood frozen where I was. A few seconds later, I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy exit door slamming shut. The warehouse became silent again, but somehow, that silence felt even worse. The radio exploded with overlapping voices. "North exit. He just went outside. Check the cameras." I stayed exactly where I was. Every instinct told me not to move. About a minute later, 2 security guards came jogging down the aisle. One of them was breathing hard, his flashlight still in his hand even though every light in the warehouse was on. "Was he here?" he asked. I nodded. I couldn't see him, I only heard him. "Which way did he go?" I pointed toward the loading docks. The guards exchanged a look before hurrying away without another word. For the rest of the shift, they told everyone over the radio to work in pairs until sunrise. That was unusual. I'd never heard that instruction before. As everyone clocked out that morning, I caught up with one of the guards in the parking lot. "Did you find whoever it was?" He hesitated. "We found evidence someone was inside." "What kind of evidence?" "No, there was a backpack behind some pallets." He wouldn't say anything else. The next night, the warehouse felt different. People were talking about the incident during lunch, but nobody seemed to know the full story. Some said it was just a homeless guy looking for a warm place to sleep. Others claimed security had chased a thief. Nobody actually knew. Around midnight, Rick pulled me aside. "I've got someone covering the north section tonight." I was relieved. Instead, he assigned me to the center of the warehouse. The entire shift went by without anything unusual happening. Then, just before 6 in the morning, Rick walked over. "I need one last favor." He handed me a pick list. "Can you grab these boxes from aisle 74 before you clock out?" I looked at the aisle number and laughed nervously. "The north end?" "It'll take 5 minutes." I didn't want to argue. The warehouse was starting to get busy with the morning shift anyway. I grabbed my cart and headed over. The farther north I walked, the quieter everything became. Most of the forklifts were already working near shipping, leaving this side almost completely empty. I found the first item without any problems, then the second. The third box was located near the very end of the aisle. As I bent down to scan it, I heard breathing, very faint, but close. I froze. It wasn't my breathing. It was coming from the opposite side of the shelving. Slow, heavy, like someone was trying to stay quiet. I slowly backed away from the shelf. Without taking my eyes off the opening at the end of the aisle, I reached for my radio. Before I could press the button, a man stepped out from behind the shelving. He was filthy. His clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His beard was overgrown and his eyes were bloodshot. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, just enough to show his teeth. In a calm voice, he said, "I've been wondering when you'd come back." Every hair on my arm stood up. There was no way this was random. He recognized me, which meant he'd been watching me for days. For a second, my brain refused to process what he'd just said. "I've been wondering when you'd come back." He spoke so casually that it almost sounded like we'd met before. I stared at him, trying to place his face. Nothing. I'd never seen him in my life. I tightened my grip on the radio. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took one slow step toward me. Instinct immediately kicked in. I hit the emergency button on my radio and backed away. "Security!" I shouted. "He's here, aisle 74. The man stopped smiling. His expression changed instantly. Without saying another word, he turned and bolted deeper into the warehouse. I wasn't about to chase him. I kept backing away until 2 security guards came running around the corner. "Which way?" I pointed toward the rear storage area. All 3 of us could hear him. His footsteps echoed through the empty aisles as he knocked boxes off shelves, trying to slow anyone following him. Within seconds, more guards joined the search. Someone locked every exterior exit from the security office. Another employee announced over the radio that the police were on their way. For nearly 20 minutes, nobody found him. That didn't make any sense. The warehouse wasn't a maze if you knew the layout. There was nowhere to go without eventually reaching an exit. Finally, one of the guards yelled over the radio, "Found him!" Everyone rushed toward the back loading area. When I got there, 2 officers already had the man on the ground in handcuffs. He didn't fight. He just kept staring at me. That same smile slowly spread across his face again. One of the police officers walked over to Rick. "How long has this employee been working nights?" Rick pointed at me. "About 6 weeks." The officer nodded. He turned toward me. "You're lucky?" I asked him what he meant. The officer sighed before answering. "This guy's been hiding inside your warehouse for at least 9 days." My stomach dropped. "What?" He was living behind unused inventory in the north section. They later searched the area where he'd been hiding. Behind several stacked pallets, officers found blankets, empty food containers, bottled water, a flashlight, and a small notebook. According to the police, he'd been sneaking into the building after employees left for the day and avoiding detection by hiding whenever people came near. Then one of the officers mentioned something that still bothers me years later. They had also found a list, a handwritten list of employee names. Most of them were crossed out. Mine wasn't. I asked what that meant. The officer simply said they couldn't know for sure. Maybe he'd copied names from employee badges. Maybe he'd been keeping track of who worked which areas. Or maybe there was another reason I never found out. The warehouse installed additional cameras, upgraded the security doors, and hired another overnight guard after the incident. As for me, I finished out the month because I needed the paycheck. But every single night after that, I caught myself looking over my shoulder whenever I walked through those long, empty aisles. A few weeks later, I accepted a daytime job at another company. I never worked another night shift again. Even now, whenever I walk through a large warehouse or home improvement store, I can't help glancing down the ends of the aisles. Because I learned something during those 6 weeks. In a building that big, someone can be watching you for days without you ever realizing they're there.